Hi, Bob.
Karen, great to see you.
Good to see you too. I'm excited about this episode of Momentum Now. We have a fantastic guest, Mohan Sivaloganathan, and he's the CEO of Harmonious Leadership, but he has actually multiple titles. He's known as the Batman of social impact. He also has an alter ego, which is a hip hop artist, Amen, right? Mm-hmm. And he is, I'm going to say, the founder of the Troublemaker movement, which I just love. There's so much to unpack in all of this.
Do we have enough time? Wow, this is great.
We're going to find some time because we need to hear about all these different things.
We're going to do the Peter Jackson style trilogy.
Nice. Mohan, so great to have you here. Thanks for agreeing to be part of the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, and thanks to y'all for just the incredible work of MVP. I admire it. I'm honored to be aligned with it.
That's great. Can we dig into Harmonious Leadership? Tell us about Harmonious Leadership, why you founded it, what you're doing, and how you're changing lives.
Oh, I appreciate it. Changing lives while trying, right? I mean, we'll see, as the time unfolds. So I've been working in the social justice space for about 16 years, and I've been working professionally for 20 years. And, when I started, it was very much like systems change, results. You've got tens of millions of kids in poverty, and therefore we got to change all of that, and we got to do it immediately. And I just felt like that ferocity behind the work. And then I started stepping through these different roles in my career, like that could be related to education or mental health, foster care, justice reform, and just kept feeling the ferocity, right? Kept feeling that, but also the frustration that led me into this work. It wasn't necessarily going away. Like I felt like I kept carrying that frustration. And now when I was at my best, I was able to channel that into this competitive fire. And into ingenuity and into movement building work, which is really what I enjoy the most, is finding ways to be able to activate folks, to channel that story within them, their voice, their action to go out and do incredible things for themselves and their community. But the frustration remains. And I think for a variety of reasons, like if you look at the data, for example, like even with quite literally the billions upon billions of dollars that have been poured into any one of these issues that we're talking about, can we really say that, at least if you look at the United States, like, are we really moving the needle on a number of these different issues? Maybe barely, like marginally at best. And a lot of times it's not even sustainable. Like if you look at education, for instance, COVID, of course, was a generational hit, right? We'd never seen anything like this. But it also showed just like how kind of stable-ish the education system is and was, because we wiped away, 30 years of gains in the span of 2 years during COVID. So all of that said, it was last year when, early last year, when I decided, hey, it's about time for me to pass the torch on with respect to the work that I was doing at our return. For me to be able to move on to the next thing, I felt like I'd done and accomplished what I wanted to, but I didn't quite know what the next thing was. And when I gave myself the space to reflect and to talk with other people around the field about like what the needs are, like there was like this light bulb that turned on for me as I was thinking about this notion of frustration and the seeming like lack of systems change for what so many of us have been aspiring to. And what I recognized was that, hey, like this problem, it's not because we have a deficit of ideas. Like there are incredible ideas that are out there. You go to any one of these conferences, panel conversations, read the books, read the reports. There are so many incredible ideas. And I'll say maybe even somewhat controversially, I don't know, did I even say that right? I don't know, we'll figure it out. Maybe AI can fix that word. It's not even necessarily money. Like money is a big problem for sure. Like there are problems in philanthropy. But what I realized was that for the people who hold the ideas, even if they have financial resourcing, they are constrained. They are constrained. They are boxed in by this mindset that we've seen across our work, across our culture for generations, which tells you that you can either hustle and work hard and innovate and scrap and achieve, or you can take care of your mind, your body, your soul, your health, your well-being. But you can't have both. Like, it's not possible to have both. Like, I would talk to people who would say, yeah, like I am burnt out. I am exhausted. I'm doing this incredible work, but I am burnt out and I feel like I'm mentally and physically falling apart. Or people who just say, you know what? I don't want to have anything to do with this. I am leaving. I'm going to take care of my mind and body, and more power to you. But now what's happening with their purpose? What's happening with those innovative, game-changing ideas? So either way, those ideas that could actually close these different gaps, the economic disparity gap, or the climate crisis, or you think about justice, education, so on. We're just not advancing ideas because we're telling people you can only have your well-being or you can have your performance, but you can't have both. And that's what really motivated me to say, it's time for something different. And I think more importantly in that, what I realized was that, hey, wait a second, I've had proximity to what could work for years. And we need to bring that forward. Because as I looked around with just the teams I've been working with, particularly comprised of high school students, college students, they'd been demonstrating a healthier, more effective way to lead for years, but nobody was really talking about it. Like, they were demonstrating that there actually is a third way approach to leadership, where you are indeed harmonizing your well-being and performance. And that's what gave rise to Harmonious Leadership. And that is the idea that I'm hoping to bring into the world more and more, to shift consciousness, to shift narratives around how you can and should lead. So it's not like, oh, you just need to meditate all the time. And it's certainly not, there's 24 hours in a day, so therefore you need to hustle all the time. Like, there is a third way approach that channels certain mindsets and tactics and structures for sustainability, that could lead us to being able to catapult our boldest ideas. And that's the type of movement I want to be a part of.
That's so interesting. And one thing that jumped out at me is that you just said that you came to this realization, because what you said is absolutely true. It's either one or the other, right? But you came to this realization because you started listening to young people, right? They're the ones that fueled this idea. And the power of the young mind who is like unencumbered by too much history and they're very future forward is something that we all need to definitely tap into. But I'm wondering, prior to that moment, like, what was your thought process before getting there, right? So you talked about Our Turn, which is an organization that you were a CEO of. But before Our Turn, as you left college, as you were advancing in your own career, right? What were the barriers that you were seeing, and how are you implementing them in your life, or opportunities that you saw, and how are you implementing them in your life to get you to this point?
Yeah. 2 words: Mamba mentality. Like, that's where I was. Like, okay. It was Mamba mentality. And I would say it was like Mamba mentality before even Kobe Bryant woke up. Because he got to this remarkable point of wisdom before, sadly, he passed away. Right. And it was almost like he was going through his own catharsis. But like, for me growing up, like, I was always following and trying to emulate alpha males. So my dad and Kobe and Malcolm X, and more, like, these larger than life characters who were so clear of like, this is the way to do things. And by any means necessary, we need to see transformative change. And so let's just go. And in the case of like a Kobe, a Michael Jordan, some of these other folks who are out there, big corporate CEO titans, there's oftentimes this mindset of like, I know what the promised land looks like. Just hop onto my back and I'm going to take you there and let's go make it happen. And so for much of my career, that's the way that I quote unquote led, was like, it was force of will. It was force of will. It was hustle. It was pride with like, yeah, hey, I was up till 2 a.m. last night working on stuff. Now I'm going to get up and then I'm going to work on more things. And like, people be like, oh, how do you do all that? Like, yeah, that's right. I do all of this stuff. Isn't that amazing? Like, that was a badge of honor for me. And then like a few things started telling me like, it's not working. And I would say that probably like in the most pronounced way, what told me like this isn't working is like my body started to tell me that. And my body started to send me these signals of like, you need to slow down. things are out of balance. And like the way that like my mind had been built for so long was like, again, I feel like you don't step into a CEO role or executive director role with some control problems. Like clearly you want to control things in some shape or form, right? Otherwise you're not going to step into that role. But like control, like control has been this like big part of my psyche for a long time. So I was like, oh, wait a second, my body's telling me these things. So like I need to completely swing the pendulum to the opposite direction. And I'm going to analyze and I'm going to fix and I'm going to reconstruct all these different things. And like, so I was operating on the poles. Like I was being that person who was making this choice between the achievement and the well-being. And like, even as that was happening, then again, I was still recognizing like this still isn't working for me. Like I'm still not feeling grounded. Like I'm not feeling satisfied in what I'm doing. I'm feeling like I need to make these big, harsh corrections back and forth. And I think that's what opened this pathway, this recognition for me of like, there's got to be just a different, healthier way, because this doesn't feel sustainable for me to be swinging a pendulum back and forth over and over and over again. And it was when I was willing to get to these spaces, I think with the support of family and friends and therapists and reading books, to actually realize that there's not even a middle place, but actually a third place, a completely different place to be operating from, like in paying attention to myself in a different way, paying attention to the people around me in a different way, where I recognize, oh, like there is actually harmony that can be achieved. Like there is grace and peace that can be achieved here.
How do you create space for that? So like there's the third place you're in, right? The rest of the world is operating in this or that, right?
Yeah.
How do you as an individual stay in that third space and create that harmony around you despite everybody else?
Yeah. So I think about an experience early last year, and this actually happened multiple times throughout my time with Our Return, where we were dealing with pretty significant financial constraint. Like I think the story of my time with Our Return, even before I joined the organization, was one of financial scarcity, and some level of survival. Sort of an unfortunate reality when you think about the realm of organizing and advocacy and education justice, and that was in spite of all the impact that the programs were driving. So all that context said, so it was a moment of time where things were really tough for us financially. And yeah, like I was finding myself at some nights, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., sitting on the couch researching RFPs. That doesn't work, right? Nobody raises money in the nonprofit sector that way. Like it's not healthy. It's not effective. I have not heard any stories of someone being successful in leading a nonprofit that way. But like I was telling myself that was the only way to do it. Now, without going into like all the individual steps that led us to a point where we were able to get the funding that we needed, increased our runway, got to a place where we were more stable as an organization, which was great. It was a victory for us. I took some time with a coach actually to reflect on that experience and what was it that I learned. And there were a few things that that I was highlighting in my conversations with my coach. And one thing I would note was that I was able to get myself to a place where I could think about how was I operating relative to the situation. And what I mean by that is like, okay, you can have a fundraising situation, right? You can have a personnel situation. You could have something around public brand and communications, whatever it is. But we as humans, we wrap ourselves into those situations. And so what was going through my mind as this situation was happening were things like, is this going to be the thing that breaks me? Am I not good enough? Have I led the organization to failure? Why aren't people responding to me properly? Why am I seeing other folks do really well with fundraising, but I'm not? So it was a lot of I statements, and they were negative. There were a lot of negative I statements that were there. So in order for me to get out of that situation, one of the things I did was I started to detach myself a bit from the situation. Like I was like, let me just get to the facts of what's going on. Let me be willing to be vulnerable and ask other people for help and for advice and for perspectives. And let me not wrap myself into this whole thing. Like this is some statement of who I am, good or bad. Like It's just a situation that we're going to navigate to the best of our ability. And that lesson taught me a lot about like just seeing myself in the midst of all the volatility and the waves, the ebbs and flows, sometimes just like the absolute nightmares that we operate in, in this world and in the social impact arena. And like, I think wound up giving me this energy to want to discover more about myself. Like I now had this I don't know, what was it, like this catalyst to want to learn more about myself and how am I connecting to all this work around me. And then especially knowing that I was going to be transitioning from my role, I started to know that like this was in the spring and then it was like in the summer when I started to think about that and knew it was going to be then 2024. Like what was the baggage that I would potentially be carrying with me even after I transitioned out of the role. And so like, this is a very long answer, Karen, to your question. Like,
No.
I think it's a daily process for me.
Yeah.
Of sometimes it's meditation, sometimes it's reading, it can be conversation with people, where like there's just trying to be willing to share more or to hear more from other people. Sometimes it's actually not doing anything and just letting it be, which is actually the thing that I'm working on the most right now. Like, I don't have to be manipulating like all these different things and always in search of something, but just letting it be. But I think it's just given me a lot more perspective and peace and equanimity around just like, my own presence, my own energy around the things around me.
I love that answer. There's so much in there that we can take from it. Bob, I stepped on you before. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to pivot. Before I pivot, do you want to follow up with anything there, Karen?
There's too much to follow up with. All right. But really what I'm hearing from that is it's really getting in touch with who you are. I love this thing about what you just said about operating, how you operate related to the situation and really not letting the situation operate you, essentially, right? Like you need to be in control of yourself, not necessarily the environments, right? And have the environment mold to you in some meaningful way. And you need to kind of find what your purpose and your why and your balance is in that. So that's my quick summary of that. But thank you for that.
I mean, just like a quick comment on that, which I talk to leaders about a lot is, you can try and give somebody the best strategic plan in the world, the best fundraising plan in the world, the best personnel and talent plan in the world. But if that person managing it is dealing with burnout or imposter syndrome or fear or scarcity or any of these things, is going to impact that plan.
Yeah.
But how often do we not just not even spend any time thinking about how that person is relating to that plan, how they're relating to their circumstances? We're just like, oh, just do the plan. Like the plan, here it is. Like just go out and execute and it's going to be fine. But I think for any of us, like we're carrying baggage, we're carrying stuff on us. And sometimes that's generational. So we deserve to give ourselves that space.
Agreed.
A quick pivot, Mohan. Thanks for that TED Talk that you did last year. It was really informative and fun to listen to as well. Thank you. But you talked about how stories last forever and sometimes strategies don't. Could you tell your story about when you worked at P&G and how, you uncovered that you had the Myers-Briggs ENTJ, I believe it was, and how you felt like that was setting you up for leadership. But the reality was maybe it wasn't. It was a double-edged sword. Can you tell us about that story?
Oh, yeah. I thought I was the guy. I thought, look, in all honesty, the competitive side of me still says like, yeah, I'm the guy. But I've awakened to a lot since then. But yeah, like I think, riding through high school, college, launching my career, like it's just like this wave, right? This nonstop, like you're just going, it's one thing after another, after another, after another. Like how often are you creating space to be able to just like reflect on who you really are as a person, as a leader when you're 18, 19, 20 years old? right? Like that doesn't happen very often. It's like everything is coming at you very quickly. And like I went into P&G with a remarkable level of confidence. Like I just knew I had it. And I was looking for like that affirmation bias, like wherever I could get it. So like all these different things, like things that people might say and testimonials, things I might read that would tell me that like, yes, I've got it. And yeah, the Myers-Briggs test was one of those things. And for me, like it was just so clear that not only did I have it, but the blueprint for success was also there too. In any situation, like, and it could be, you know, a certain type of company or nonprofit, like those blueprints are out there. Like I was just talking about, like the plan, right? If you've got the plan, that should be it. And so like the situation for me in my first job was that I was asked to help to drive the passing of this manufacturing audit. This is a manufacturing site in Northeast Pennsylvania. There were folks who had been working at that manufacturing site longer than I'd been alive. So like they'd been around the block. They'd seen all the plans. They'd seen all the audits. They'd seen all of it, right? And then now here comes this young kid, 22 years old, who's been tasked with like, you're going to get this site to pass this audit, which like the site unfortunately was not able to pass for years leading up to that point. Like, yeah, this bold and brash 22-year-old, he's going to be the guy to do it. And so I thought, all right, it's clean enough. Like we'd seen other places across the country who had done it well. Here's a blueprint. We're just going to implement it. And I know that I've got the secret sauce as a leader. So everybody's just going to jump on board and like, they're going to follow me to the promised land and we're going to get this done. And it was the complete opposite. Like they had no interest in it. And like, I was so like tunnel vision with that notion, like that ENTJ, like the command, the control, that judging side, that decision making side, like this has got to be the only way. Like what I wasn't thinking about though is like, you know, what is it that folks might still be carrying after years of being told that you're supposed to be able to do this audit, but like not getting through it? Like, how are they feeling about that? How are they feeling about what seemed like a lack of agency for them? Like there's someone from like up high, some elite ivory tower who's telling them what to do. Like, are they losing their own ability to be able to dictate the terms of how they work and how they engage with other people? How do they feel about this young son of immigrants, person of color coming out of nowhere and telling them what to do? Like, I wasn't thinking about any of those things. And I remember as I shared in the TED Talk, you know, I was put on a performance improvement plan. And it was brutal. Like it was brutal. And just sitting there in the meeting with my manager's manager as he's reading out the feedback that people have been sharing with me, and why I'm being placed on a performance improvement plan, and how like my annual raise was going to be frozen up, and here are the things that I need to do over the next 60 days, literally just to save my job. And one of the things that I had to do was then not just suck it up, but then go and talk to folks around the site, not about the audit, had nothing to do about the audit. Like, what do you need from me as a person? Like, what do you need from me being in a management position? And I started hearing things from folks who wanted to be successful. Like they wanted to be successful, but like all of the intimidation that started to rise to the surface because of my approach. Like there's one person like who, it was interesting, like was saying that, yeah, you know, I just feel like, you know, sometimes you're condescending or sarcastic with us. And I was like, what does that have to do anything with an audit? Like that was my reflexive thought. It has nothing to do with an audit. Like you're calling me sarcastic. What? I like to joke around. Like what's, you know, and I'm like, I could feel my defensiveness coming up. But the more and more I had these conversations, the more I was willing to like hear and listen to what people were saying. There was another person who said, yeah, like I consider myself to be a pretty smart person, but you come around and you speak really well and it kind of makes me feel lesser than. It's like, oh, okay. Like, and I realized like, I know I don't want that for you. I also don't want that for myself. Like, this isn't the branding I want for myself. And I don't want you to feel lesser than. Like, I want us to be able to do this together. And it was then when I started to realize, all right, like all this stuff that I've been carrying as badges of honor, they're maybe not all that. Like, there's something I've got to adjust here in this process. in terms of how I'm showing up and how I'm communicating with people. And that actually helped me to get to a place that was just far more compassionate, like far more collaborative with people. Like I was actually able to see people instead of being these robots who I could just press certain buttons and then they would go and function the way that I want them to. That wasn't explicitly my mindset, but it was essentially the way that I was operating. And that was a recipe for failure. And I think I needed that. Like I needed that correction to get to a place where I could be like someone who is actually a leader and not a dictator or just like a manager and executor of instructions.
That's extremely reflective for a young person, that you shifted, right, in order to see people as they were and where they might be. But I'm wondering, again, as a young person, as a person of color, do you feel that people saw you, right? Or that they had different expectations because of your age, because of your background, that you shouldn't be that way, right? You shouldn't be as confident as you presented yourself to be.
Yeah.
Right. And so therefore they had a different reaction to you than maybe they would have had to somebody else.
Yes. I'd say yes and. Yes and. Right. I think that there are a lot of cultural markers there that certainly made me stand out versus the pack and for better or worse, right? For better or worse. Did they fully see me? No. Did I allow them in to fully see me? No. So there's always a lot of factors that exist. And one of the things that I share with people pretty often these days is from time to time I'll get feedback from people saying like, hey Mohan, like I really admire how you're your full self in your work now and in everything that you do. And like, I want to be able to get to that place. Yeah. I'm like, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And it was incredibly hard for this to happen. Like for me to get to this place where I have this level of confidence and trust in myself, which asterisk, by the way, I'm still working at it. Like there's still stuff that like I'm still unpacking, like I think any of us in our lives. But yeah, like, a lot of people, like this is feedback that I received early on in my career in multiple jobs of people feeling like, all right, yeah, Mohan is someone who he has vision. He's ambitious, but we don't know the why behind it all. Like we don't really know where he's coming from. And at first in my career, like I took offense to that. Like, you don't need to know that from me. Like, why? Like, why?
That was my first thought in my head. Like, why they need?
Yeah, why do you need to know? Why do you need to know my why? Like, aren't we out here to achieve, to get things done, to do innovative, world-changing things? Like, why do you need to know about my psychology? like, come on, what's happening here? But like, it took that feedback coming to me multiple times, and then finally, one manager in particular at Teach for America, who just in an incredibly loving and compassionate way sat down with me and was like, hey, so here's all the performance stuff. This is all cool, but we've got to talk about this one thing. And that was transformative for me. Like for someone to show that type of care in who I was, to be willing to take in all these different inputs and then to illustrate for me how it could actually make a difference if I was willing to bring my walls down. Because yeah, my walls were up early on. Like I think there was a lot of, I keep talking about this notion of baggage, but like I had my scars, I had my conditioning, all these things that told me like, no, like you can't see this stuff from me. Like, you shared like as a part of my bio that I'm a hip hop artist. I wasn't sharing with people that I was a hip hop artist, like people in my work world, until like 6-7 years ago, even though I've been performing and doing hip hop music like in shows in New York and things like that for 20 years. Like I've been out there doing it for a long time, but I wasn't telling anybody. I think that like over time, again, like I just sort of like, brought that wall down more and more and more. And like that actually gave me this room to actually flourish. And I was like, that's what I want. Like to be this full flourishing version of myself. And like that feeling I have when I'm able to do that, like I need more of that. So I'm just kind of continuing on that path now.
So Mohan, if you could magically go back to that day that you were asked to lead the audit right? And when you think of our listeners, they're all in their 20s likely, or most of them, and they're going to be handed a project, right? What advice would you give our listeners, and what would you have done differently to start that project off on the right track?
Seth Godin has this framework that I really like. I don't know if I would call it a framework, but at least like some gems that he offered in his last book about doing the rally and the pre-mortem before like a big initiative or project. And I love that. So if I think about like the audit, right? The pre-mortem, it'd be like, all right, here's this audit that we need to do. What would it look like if we completely fail? Like, not just that we didn't pass, but we completely fail. What would happen along the way? Because I think that's not something that's only looking at the future, but it also looks at the past. Because again, the site had struggled to get past this audit. What I did not take into account was why we were struggling. And no, it's not just because of the lack of Mohan being there the prior several years. There's something going on, right? But like, you have to go on that learning journey and do that type of discovery. And then if you look to the future, yeah, like we would probably see that, yeah, if things completely failed, it was a top-down approach. There wasn't enough training. There wasn't enough investment and buy-in. Like, we probably would have heard things like that from the team. And then the rally, okay, if everything goes well and we're successful, what happened? Like, what happened along the way? Doing all that before even starting. And then I think that can then start to surface, all right, here are the different frameworks and structures for the audit and so on. But, here's how people actually were invested and bought in. Here's how people were able to step into new leadership opportunities. This is what collaboration looked like. This is maybe what the pace of the work wound up looking like. And then being able to co-create that future together. I think those are things that I would want to do if I had to go back, but it's also stuff that I carry with me now.
Mm-hmm.
Even there's a project that I'm working on, with a friend and a collaborator. And we were talking about this idea for this rollout strategy. And we actually spent some time talking about, hey, like, what are all the reasons why we shouldn't do this? We just talked about all the reasons why we should do it, why we're excited, how it could work out well. Why should we not do this? And we actually gave ourselves some space to talk about that. And that was just incredibly helpful for us, I think, to have some honesty, to have some vulnerability there, to make some adjustments, but also for us to be clear with each other about what it is that we're stepping into. Because like, this is not just an investment in like, this institution or this product. It's an investment in each other, when you're doing this work.
One of the things you talked about, which, you described leadership in general, right? Like you said, leadership is not a title, it's a verb, right? It's around action. So as we think about young people today, right? And you have spearheaded this in terms of enabling them to use their voices. Can you just give some quick tips for them on how to activate their voice, and keep that going through their career?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I love that. I love that. Literally this morning, someone reached out to me, a student from Utah, saying, hey, I want to be able to launch some student work out here in Utah. And I'd just love to get some advice on how to be able to do that. And there are a couple things I just really appreciate in that example from this student. For one, doing this work and around education and education justice for the past several years, I didn't get to interact with many people from Utah. But like, there's work to be done, like all across the board. Like sometimes we get obsessed with like the big cities and things like that. But like, hey, like, you've got this set of generational challenges that young people are navigating day in, day out. So that's more like a macro reflection. But I think in terms of this student, right? And going back to the idea of being able to exercise voice, I think you have to start from a place of curiosity. And I think we oftentimes tell people, oh, just go speak up, like just go and voice up, and that's it. But it's not that simple. Like, how often are you able to just easily find that platform, to be able to find the courage, to be able to overcome whatever barriers you might have had up until that point in your life? But what can curiosity do for you? Being willing to reach out to people, to be able to ask questions. Well, there are a few things that can happen. One is you can have a better understanding of the context that you're operating in. and the landscape that you're operating in, and recognize that, hey, like there are other people out there who are also dealing with their own stuff. Like they've also got their own issues. They've got their own barriers to success and to flourishing. So you get to understand the landscape that you're operating in. You also can build allyship with people, which is a huge thing that I think folks need in order to get to that place of exercising voice, is knowing that other people have your back. And when you're willing to be curious and to ask questions and to demonstrate that, hey, like not only do I want to learn from you, but I want to be able to build with you, you are more likely to generate that type of allyship. And when you have that allyship, you're going to have more confidence to be able to go out and to exercise your voice. That will also then give you visibility into the places where you can actually do that. Because sometimes I think that's where folks get tripped up, is again, like, yeah, just go speak out. All right. Like where, how, like, should I submit a letter to the editor of the paper? Like, there's no guarantee of where that's going to go. Like, should I submit an op-ed to Teen Vogue? Like, Teen Vogue has like national demand. Am I going to put something on social media? Well, if you've got like 100 followers, like, is that going to do it for you? Like it can just be confusing and overwhelming. But like, once you build that community, once you have a greater understanding of this landscape and environment that you're operating in, I think that can start to reveal the answers for you. And like there were folks, who I worked with at Our Return, who would talk about like how they would be shy when they're in school and when they're in class, and sometimes would get called out by their teachers and professors for like not voicing up or for not saying something the right way. But then they would get to Our Turn and then forge this community with other students and with staff members and our organizational partners, get opportunities to actually be able to like nurture their voice and their story in a safe space, to actually be able to practice that. And then the first time they would do anything that is big in public would be in front of a school board and delivering testimony for why they need to be able to put $5 million into a mental health initiative, or why they need to do an equity audit for all the schools in the district, like really big, high stakes stuff. And they're able to rise to that moment because of all the steps they took leading up into that point. So that would be, what I would encourage young people to do, is like to lean into that curiosity. Be willing to reach out to people, do that research online. Like that's what's going to get your confidence and your game up, so that you can really stand on the strength of your story and your voice.
I love that. I not quite the same thing, but I understand the power of this. When I sent my son to school, one of the reasons I chose that school is because they leaned on public speaking as a core competency and writing from kindergarten. And so even if it was just standing up in kindergarten to talk about the weather or whatever the little moments, and it would build up over time. And so that built their confidence over time. They didn't even know it, right? In terms of that public speaking and sharing their story. And it was part of the school ecosystem. And so that, based on your definition, created some of that allyship. And depending on the student, obviously they would go on and do some more things. So I totally get that and love that there needs to be those vehicles to help students build that confidence to share their story. So I love that.
Absolutely.
Karen, I think the clock is telling us it's time for capturing the lessons from today, and Mohan's done a great job.
So intently, but I might not have all the notes down. Okay,
I have a couple. I got your back.
So you're gonna have to back me up, all right? But number one was basically creating your own balance. And I feel like that balance is understanding yourself, right? Avoiding the negative I statements, I think, was a really important point. And detaching yourself from whatever structures are around you. Basically, look at yourself from the outside, looking down. Also, reflecting on how people see themselves, not just how they see you, is a key lesson, right? That we all have to remember, because people come with their own baggage. We don't know how they're showing up in this space. So that's an empathetic approach to leadership. And figuring out how to co-create, right, a future with other people. So developing that collaborative spirit. Curiosity is always super important. Ask tons of questions. And as you just talked about, build that allyship so that you can build your confidence. I'm going to go back to what you said in the TED Talk, which is leadership is a verb. right? So it requires action. What did I miss?
There's a couple things that just reinforced how powerful they are. One is, this is super tactical, but very powerful, is the pre-mortem. When taking on a project, especially if you're in a position of leading, or even when you're not, that pre-mortem just unlocks creative problem solving. It unlocks some history that can provide guidance on what to do in the future. It's a technique I've been fortunate to be exposed to, and it changed a few projects that I worked on for sure, to have the team talk about what could go wrong before starting. It's a wonderful technique. The other thing you said that I really loved, Mohan, is curiosity. Just, it's such a really strong superpower. And whether it's a natural curiosity, which can be very helpful, especially for young professionals, or just find the curiosity, right? Making note to be curious at the right time and asking questions can, again, unlock possibilities, especially with others who are willing to help in the community. Yeah.
Thanks for that summary.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like I dominated the mic time.
That's
about you.
For y'all to
that's
late.
That's the strategy.
Yeah, let's work for us. All right.
Yeah. So, want to have some fun and handle some rapid fire questions?
Let's do it.
Yeah, just whatever pops into your mind first. If you want to slip a story into one, go for it. But what was your favorite subject in high school?
Favorite subject in high school? That is such a good question.
Or what was your least favorite subject in high school, if you want to start there?
Favorite subject in high school, I'm going to go with the AP US history course I took in my senior year, where the professor, he conducted the class through conversation, and was the first history teacher I had who broke away from just the memorization of milestones to actually let's start uncovering the real history of the United States. And so I think just the approach and the exposure was very illuminating for me.
That's fantastic. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Oh man, I'm very fortunate to have received some incredible advice from people. I don't know if I could even say what's the best. I'll say one recent piece of advice that I really appreciated was we were just kind of examining this notion of all these things that we navigate in our lives and how to kind of feel and interact with them. And what I recognize is that sometimes I just place this pressure on myself to be happy, to be joyful, to be purposeful, to be giving. And it was sort of like a provocation, maybe not necessarily advice. But they said, all right, can we just take some time talking about the difference between happiness and contentment? And what I realized is that I put so much of my time and energy, and I think rightfully so, I should say, towards happiness. And happiness needing to be this thing that's existing all the time. But what about the peace and equanimity that can come with contentment? And that's something that I'm exploring more and more right now, is leaning into that notion, exploring that notion of contentment. So I think that there was some advice in that conversation, but it was more of a push to me to sort of expand the aperture.
Yeah.
How I'm thinking about how I'm sort of operating and feeling and thinking day in, day out.
Got it. Let's go to the opposite side of the advice coin. What's some advice you've heard that you're glad you didn't embrace it? What's the worst advice you've ever had?
Well, I'll give you kind of a classic sort of ENTJ alpha male hyper-capitalistic style. of advice. I remember one manager told me once, like you need to operate as if you are the last priority on my list, and I have more important things to be doing than interacting with you. And so I think what he was trying to encourage was like proactive communication, I guess, or advocating for myself. But you're literally telegraphing to me that like I actually don't matter to you. Like,
that's what I heard.
That's it.
We're just so busy that you're not going to take the time to know what's going on with me and my work, and so I have to bring that to you. And yeah, that was terrible. That was bad. Not only did I not do that, but I try to make it a point that I do not put that on people I work with.
Sounds like that advice did you well.
The anti-advice.
The favorite question to wrap up, what's your why? Why do you do what you do?
Oh, I love this. This is like, you're literally catching me at this moment of like, I call it like a metamorphosis right now, where it'd be interesting if we had this conversation again, even just like over coffee or something a year from now. But for some time, it's been around, like Karen, you mentioned, like the troublemaker movement, like activating people to lift their voices and their action to transform the status quo, and a status quo for themselves and for other people. So that's still true. Increasingly, what I'm playing with and what is lighting me up more and more is this notion of, for myself and other people, embracing and illuminating your story. Like the dynamic prism of your story. Irrespective of who you are, where you come from, there is beauty in that. There is grace in that. There's learning there for yourself and for other people. And I'm just finding myself more and more wanting to be able to lift up those stories of people, particularly the ones that typically don't break through into the mainstream, into a TED Talk or a Moth Talk or anything like that. But wanting to create like those spaces, the informal, the formal spaces for that vibrant storytelling that we all need and deserve.
It's fantastic. And your story continues. I just want to shout out to your album, right? Per Aspera ad Astra, under your stage name, Amen. And if you want to listen to one song right away, one of my favorites is I.I.O. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mohan.
Thank you for being here today and supporting MVP, and for all your advice and everything you do for the community. We appreciate you and what you're doing.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. So good to connect with you.